Our News is brought to you by Alive.
Believe in best.
Tonight on our news, taxpayers on the hook for nearly $1 billion in undisclosed liabilities. We've got the figures from today's mid-year budget communication. Plus, the opposition is on the defense, and thousands to come to our shores as the world's largest cruise ship docks in the port of Nassau. Welcome to our news and thanks for joining us. I'm Christina Dragovich. Topping news tonight, outlining the mid-year budget figures for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. Prime Minister Philip Davis says the Minister administration failed to disclose significant liabilities and unfunded obligations to the tune of $1 billion. Our Jasmine Brown joins us in studio with the details. Jasmine?
That's right, Christina. In his more than hour-long communication, the Prime Minister went far beyond giving an update on the country's fiscal standing.
The previous administration failed to disclose significant liabilities and unfunded obligations of the government, totaling some $821.5 million, almost $1 billion.
Davis says the liabilities and unfunded obligations includes $255.3 million in debt and interest payments related to the government taking over the legacy debt of BPL, $155.5 million in unpaid bills and other obligations for state-owned enterprises, $25.7 million for the Ministry of the Public Service, largely representing outstanding payments for insurance services, $17.7 million for the Office of the Attorney General to settle outstanding legal claims, $14.2 million in VAT refunds for the Department of Inland Revenue. And that's not all.
$15.8 million for the Ministry of Health, which include outstanding payments owed to Doctors Hospital for critical care of COVID-19 patient support. $129.5 million in unfunded contract obligations for the Ministry of Public Works. $23 million in bills for water purchased by the Water and Sewage Corporation. $56 million for the Public Hospital Authority, which includes over $25 million in potential liabilities for the 2018 union agreement and $34.2 million for the Ministry of Tourism, including a significant amount of unpaid bills for Bahamas Air.
As he provided a line-by-line breakdown for the $1 billion disparity in the Minister administration's pre-election economic and fiscal update report, the PM also accused the former administration of not being forthcoming with the Bahamian people. Davis also tabled a Deloitte report which found that the Minister administration's report was only partially compliant with the Fiscal Responsibility Act in its revenue and expenditure forecasts and was non-compliant with the FRA in detailing its new spending and outstanding stock of arrears. Davis says what is also frustrating is some vendors have been refusing to cooperate with the government.
In trying to determine the most accurate picture of the public finances, many vendors have chosen not to cooperate in providing even the most basic information, or continue to stall and attempt to frustrate efforts to determine who received public funds, in what amounts, for what purpose, and under what terms. This is extremely unwise.
Now, when it comes to the state of the country's finances, Davis insisted that the Bahamas is headed in the right direction and moving away from the fiscal cliff, as figures indicated a year-over-year increase in revenue as the deficit and debt to GDP ratio both decreased.
While the external economic environment does still remain favorable, going forward, it is clear that we will need to remain vigilant and prudent.
And as you heard, the Prime Minister had a lot to say in Parliament today, and much of it did not place the previous administration in the best light. We can expect as the debate continues, more will be revealed. Back to you, Christina.
Thanks, Jasmine. Well, the Prime Minister also announcing in Parliament that COVID-19 restrictions are being further relaxed. He says the move comes amidst vastly reduced numbers of infections and hospitalizations.
Cruise ships no longer need to present a passenger and crew manifest disclosing vaccination status. We have reduced testing requirements for day 5 post-travel. Residential care establishments are now able to set their own parameters for visitors. Recitals, regattas, in-person conferences, seminars, or workshops, and drive-through cookouts will be relaxed. These events will not require submissions for review and approval by the advisory committee. Restrictions surrounding large events will also be eased.
Salons, barbershops, and spas will now be allowed to operate at 50%. And when it comes to events like regatta and other events that draw large crowds, health protocols will be followed.
Recitals, regattas, in-person conferences, seminars, or workshops, and drive-through cookouts will be relaxed. These events will not require submissions for review and approval by the advisory committee. Restrictions surrounding large events will also be eased.
Serious accusations placed at the feet of the former administration after the Prime Minister's mid-year budget communication. Our Sasha Lightbourne joins us live from the House of Assembly with the opposition response.
That's right, Christina. Opposition leader Michael Pintard hitting back at those accusations today by Prime Minister Philip Davis, describing them as misleading, disingenuous, and simply muddying the waters.
It's disingenuous of the government to attempt to give the impression that the circumstances at the beginning of COVID are identical to this period where the economy is gradually being opened in its entirety. Because the fact of the matter is, many of the restrictions that we followed in the early days of COVID were similar to what was then considered best practices internationally.
Prime Minister Philip Davis also using the opportunity to speak directly to the pre-election report, noting significant liabilities and unfunded obligations of the government at the time total nearly $1 billion. To that, Pintard said this.
This has been rebutted on multiple occasions that it is not, in fact, the case. Ironically, the Deloitte and Touche report that they refer to, when you look at the report, it really does not support the point or the assertion made ultimately by the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister Davis also chastising the previous government's food program.
Much of what the Prime Minister himself identified was accumulated under the Progressive Liberal Party. So it's rather troubling that the way he laid out the case today suggested that some of them were doing something untoward, and it is simply not the case. We asked the Prime Minister to provide the full details to the public where he believed that something inappropriate has been done, and we would like to know why the government presently does not have the food program in full operation, given the food insecurity that many Bahamians are experiencing.
Now debate is expected to get underway right here in the House of Assembly on the mid-year budget next Wednesday. Back to you, Christina.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister also mincing no words with respect to Public Beaches and Parks Authority, describing it as a slush fund. Prime Minister Davis says the previous administration did nothing to ensure that the services being paid for by Bahamian taxpayers were provided. Former Beaches and Parks Executive Chairman Shannon Don Cartwright responded.
As it relates to the processes that we followed, these were processes and practices that were in place from the previous PLP administration. In fact, the Bahamas Public Parks and Bridges Public Authority was started under the Progressive Liberal Party. We just adhered and followed the policies that they had in place.
An audit into the internal controls and operations of the Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Authority revealed hundreds of thousands of dollars in contracts were issued during the last administration without any real identifiable need. And temperatures in the high 70s this evening. Meteorologist Greg Thompson is in the Weather Center with the latest. Good evening, Greg.
Thanks, Christina. Welcome, everybody, for our first look at weather on this very warm Wednesday evening. Temperatures back into the mid to upper 70s, 77 outside our studios with just a few clouds. Winds are still out of the south-southeast, bringing in that nice warm air mass at 9 miles per hour. And your feels-like temperature, very, uncomfortable 79? Yeah, it's warm out there. Satellite view, quiet across the islands. Once again, basically a carbon copy of what we had for the last couple of days. That high-pressure ridge is starting to back out towards the east. That wind flow is coming out of the southeast to south across most of the chain of islands. And that's, as I mentioned, bringing in a nice warm air mass across us. No rainfall in the forecast, and it's going to remain warm for the rest of the evening. That's your first look at weather. Your extended forecast is still to come.
Still to come on our news, a former PM says he hopes African refugees are treated like Ukrainian refugees in the future. And police build partnerships in Bain and Grantstown. But first, the world's largest cruise ship arrives in Nassau. That's coming up when our news returns.
Got size at 6'5". Hi, this is Shamik.
As war rages on in Eastern Europe, former Prime Minister Perry Christie says he hopes African refugees are treated like Ukrainian refugees in the future. Jared Higgs tells us more.
While expressing sympathy for the 1.5 million Ukrainians displaced from their homes, Christie also hoped that the horrors of war would help world leaders to become more sensitive to the plight of African refugees.
I just hope, too, that as people becomes more conscious of the impact of this, that when these things happen in Africa, okay, we'll have the same kind of feeling about that, right? And not leave it open for people to say, oh, this great feeling and great reaction of the world was because we're dealing with people who look like the Ukrainians and not people who look like me.
Media coverage of the conflict in Europe has been criticized as being racist at times. A Ukrainian prosecutor was slammed for his comments during a televised interview, where he said the conflict was emotional for him because he sees European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed. Another reporter for a major network was also criticized for comments he made during a report where he said, "This isn't Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city."
We're hoping, therefore, that we are sensitive to the fact that this happens in other places, and we must be sensitive to the world being able to respond in the same fashion to those areas where it happens, and not have a level of disinterest because it's not in Europe.
Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th of this year, but the conflict has been going on for the past 8 years. In a national address before the February 24th invasion, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Russia could not feel safe, develop, and exist because of what he called the threat from a modern Ukraine. His actions, which include regular bombings of Ukrainian cities and key infrastructure, have led to harsh sanctions imposed by many Western nations. And as the Davis administration mulls over whether to join the list of countries sanctioning Russia, Christie was asked whether he thought the move was necessary.
There is no doubt in my mind that to the extent that we are members of the United Nations, we will be a part of complying with whatever international sanctions that exist. The Bahamas won't jump off and say we're not in this world.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Jared Higgs.
Former Prime Minister Perry Christie is weighing in on the marital rape debate, saying all offensive acts that cause pain to women in the country must be looked at carefully. He made the comments on the sidelines of an event at the National Training Agency.
We must always take steps that are pointed in the direction of protecting, okay, those people who are victims, okay? Whatever level the steps are be, that legislation must be aimed at being effective, okay, and it must be aimed at being able to serve the interest that is intended to serve.
Successive governments, including two administrations led by Christie, failed to criminalize marital rape. The current government is considering criminalizing marital rape. However, it hasn't made a commitment to do so. The controversial topic divides members of the public, with many expressing a view that a husband cannot rape his wife due to a biblical imperative that you consent to sex with marriage.
Whatever the debate is about, okay, you begin with looking at the victims and understanding what it is you have to do to protect victims, okay, in terms of abuse of any kind. That ought to drive public policy, the compelling urgency to extend levels of protection to people who are victims.
In other news, the world's largest cruise ship making its first stop in the Bahamas today. Bethany McDermott was there and has this report.
The Royal Caribbean Wonder of the Sea, now the largest ship making its first call, docked at the Nassau cruise port with the ability to hold more than 7,000 passengers. According to Royal Caribbean President and CEO Michael Bailey, the plan is to increase the number of tourism arrivals by 2024.
Over a year, that's going to be about 360,000 cruise tourists coming to the Bahamas. Our goal is by 2024 we'll be close to 3 million people coming to the Bahamas, both to Freeport, to Nassau, and of course to Perfect Day at Coco Key.
Bailey added that every month the ship is expected to bring 28,000 guests. The 1,188-foot vessel has a central park with 20,000 real plants, boasts 18 decks, 20 restaurants, and 2,867 cabins. The flagship is Bahamian registered and flies the Bahamian flag. According to Bailey, the ship took 2.5 years to construct. It's the fifth ship in the Oasis class to come to the Bahamas.
It's meaningful because it's our first port of call on a what's called a revenue cruise, where we've got our customers, our guests on board, and it's symbolic because when Royal Caribbean was started as a company, as a cruise line over 50 years ago, our very first port was Nassau. So here we are 50 years later, through everything we've all been through, and Wonder of the Seas is coming to Nassau.
In 2019, RCL accounted for 34% of the total number of cruise passengers to arrive in the Bahamas. In a ceremony to mark the inaugural arrival to the Nassau cruise port, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Tourism Chester Cooper announced plans for more calls to Grand Bahama.
And I am happy to announce that after discussions with RCL along with the Minister for Grand Bahama, they are contemplating increasing their calls to Freeport. This is what a great partnership looks like, Michael.
Now, as this is the first of many voyages to dock here in Nassau, Bailey says the plan is to continue to build on the relationship with Bahamian stakeholders. Reporting for Our News, I'm Bethany McDermott.
When Our News comes back from the break, police work to build connections in the Bain and Grantstown community. Plus, the latest from our Bahamian NBA players. The details when Our News returns.
Got size at 6'5". Hi, this is Shamika.
This is Our News. Welcome back. Police meeting with members of the Lade Street community, listening to the concerns of the Bain and Grantstown constituents today.
This is a part of our police month. You know, we do walkabouts every day throughout the police force, but today what we've decided to do is the Commissioner of Police would lead the charge. We're doing walkabout today throughout the Bahamas. So in Nassau right now, all of our divisions and divisional commanders and officers are in the community and interacting with residents. The same is happening in Grand Bahama and the remainder of the Family Islands.
Shifting gears now, former parliamentarian and cabinet minister Loretta Butler Turner and her family are mourning the loss of their husband and father, Edward. Our News understands from family members that Turner, an attorney, died yesterday. He was 70. Our News extends deepest sympathies to the Turner family. And the former CEO and director of Fidelity Group, Anwar Sundarji, has passed away. The company extending condolences to his family tonight. In a joint statement with the Sundarji family, Fidelity described the late banker as a pioneer in the local sector. His contributions toward the promotion of sound saving practices and responsible borrowing, the expansion of domestic capital markets, and the general development of the banking industry were recognized by industry leaders. For the full statement, visit Our News Bahamas on Facebook. Well, another tough loss for Buddy and his Pacers. Meanwhile, DeAndre Ayton's double-double helps fuel a win for the Suns. Marcellus Hall tells us more.
Hi, welcome to our sports, everybody. I'm Marcellus Hall. Buddy Hield and the Indiana Pacers, they've been mired at the bottom of the Eastern Conference for much of the year. And despite Buddy's much better play since being traded to Indiana from the Sacramento Kings, that win-loss total has not changed much. Last night, they were hoping to get a win on the board. It didn't turn out quite the way they wanted. Let's take a look. Buddy Hield and the Indiana Pacers hosting the Cleveland Cavaliers last night. Cavs 6th in the Eastern Conference. Pacers holding steady at 13th. Get to the game action now. Solid performance for the Cavaliers. They go on to win 127-124. Closely contested ball game. As for our guy Buddy Hield, the Grand Bahama native, on the floor last night for 38 minutes, finished up with 14 points, 2 rebounds. And he also added 8 assists in the ballgame, doing his part distributing the basketball. Shot 5 of 6 from the floor. Didn't take many shots, but when he did, he made them 5 of 6. Again, like we said, 4 of 4 from downtown. Did not add up to a win as the Pacers once again go down by the final score of 127-124. Phoenix Suns, they were in action last night again, which meant DeAndre Ayton was playing. Suns looking to continue to get back on the winning track, especially without the services of their one-star point guard, Chris Paul. DeAndre doing his part. Suns getting the win, 102-99 ends up being the final. Suns still hold on to the first place position in the Western Conference. Looking at DeAndre's stats, big man, doing pretty well as he continues to help his team get on the back stay on the winning track. 36 minutes played, 21 points, 19 rebounds. He also had 1 assist and shot 10 of 19 from the floor. If you're wondering about the Suns' next game, they play again tonight. Back-to-back performances for them. They'll be back in action this evening against the Miami Heat. Should be a great game. Well, let's see how that one turns out. And that's your look at sports here on this Hump Day Wednesday. I'm Marcellus Hall. Back to you.
Thanks, Marcellus. The extended weather forecast is still to come when Our News returns.
Got size at 6'5". Hi, this is Shamika.
Welcome back to Our News. Mostly clear skies midway through the week. Greg is back in the Weather Center with a look ahead.
Thanks again, Christina. Welcome back, everybody, for our second look at weather. Very quiet across our area as that ridge of high pressure continues to dominate our weather, and that southeasterly flow is bringing in some very warm temperatures. Not much in terms of any moisture, but those warm temperatures will be with us for the next couple of days as that ridge backs out towards the east. That's going to be paving a way for a frontal boundary that's going to be taking shape. A low-pressure system in the Gulf of Mexico will form by Friday into Saturday. That will in turn drag a frontal boundary across our area by Saturday night into Sunday. Behind that front, we do expect a very nice change in the air mass. It's going to be comfortable, nice and cool, but the breeze will pick up and it will continue to keep us very comfortable for the beginning of next week. Boating forecast for the Northwest Bahamas tonight through tomorrow. Small craft caution in effect. Southeast to southerly flow at 15 to 20 knots. Your sea is 4 to 6 feet over the ocean. Low tide is at 6:40 tonight. For the central and southeastern islands, east to southeast flow at 15 to 20 knots. Your seas will be running 4 to 7 feet with some slightly lingering swells. Here's a look now at your national forecast. A look now at your extended forecast through next Wednesday. frontal boundary expected by the weekend, and of course, time changes on Sunday. We'll keep you abreast of that. Back to you, Christina.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you for joining us for our news tonight. On behalf of the entire team, I'm Christina Dragovich. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night. Have a beautiful evening, Bahamas.